Welcome back to Hockey Thoughts with Scott. This is the first of our trade tree discussions that I want to get into on this channel itself. These are going to be fun. They're going to be thought-provoking. I'm going to pose some questions as we go along. So I hope that you all enjoy this series that we're going to be getting into. The first trade I want to get into is a little bit of an obscure trade, but I'm going to pose a question in a moment. And this trade has to do with Mike Wilson being traded from the Buffalo Sabres to the Florida Panthers. Now the question that I want to pose here is, how did this Mike Wilson trade help to define the last 20 years of Sabres hockey? Now you may be thinking about this and wondering, what am I talking about? Give me a few minutes and I'm going to talk about why this trade could help define the last 20 years of Sabres hockey. I'm not saying this is definitive, but it helps to define where the Sabres were, where they've been, and potentially now where they're going in the future. So let's talk about the original trade. Mike Wilson was a Buffalo Sabre and he went to the Florida Panthers. He was traded for Rhett Warrener, as well as a 5th round pick in the 1999 draft. Rhett Warrener came into the Sabres organization, helped them immediately get to the Stanley Cup final in 1999. So that was a win-win. Mike Wilson's career really faded into obscurity after the trade, ended up between the NHL, the AHL, Europe, and then ultimately the ECHL. That 5th round pick, though, was very significant. Not often can you say a 5th round pick is significant, but in this case it was, as it became Ryan Miller. We'll talk about Ryan Miller more in a little bit as we get into the more recent version of the Buffalo Sabres. But I want to talk a little bit more on Rhett Warrener. Rhett Warrener played for several seasons with Buffalo and ultimately was then traded to the Calgary Flames. So when Rhett Warrener got traded to the Calgary Flames, there was actually a deal that was made in addition to that to set up the deal with Calgary. And that was a trade with Colorado. And that was Steven Reinprecht going to Colorado for the rights to Keith Ballard, who had been drafted in the 2000 draft in the first round by the Sabres. So Reinprecht comes to Buffalo, stops over for not even a cup of coffee, and is traded with Rhett Warrener to the Calgary Flames. 2 players came back in that deal. It was a 2-for-2 trade, no picks. The first piece that came over was Steve Bejan. Steve Bejan played no games with the Sabres. They tried to get him into the AHL. Montreal claimed him off waivers and actually had a very nice career. The second piece of the deal, though, became a significant piece of the Sabres run in 06 and 07, and that was Chris Drury. Sabre fans can argue whether Drury should have stayed, left. That's not for me to argue in this particular case. All I'm mentioning here is that Chris Drury came to the Sabres as a part of that deal, became a part of the core, along with Ryan Miller, that led the Sabres to 2 straight Eastern Conference final appearances. One of them went to Game 7. The other one, they were completely outplayed by the Ottawa Senators. And then the Sabres fell and went up and down. However, up until around 2011, 2012, that's when the wheels started to fall off of the Sabres a little bit, which led eventually to the trade of Ryan Miller to the St. Louis Blues. Now, something about Ryan Miller that most hockey fans may not realize is he's actually the Sabres' all-time leader in wins. It is not Dominic Hasek. It is actually Ryan Miller. So if you're playing trivia, There's a trivia question that most people probably won't get. Now, Ryan Miller was traded to the St. Louis Blues with Steve Ott, and there was 5 pieces that came back in that deal. The first piece was Yaroslav Halak. We'll talk about Yaroslav Halak in a moment because he was here a little bit longer than Steven Reinprecht. The second piece that came over was Chris Stewart. Had a couple years with the Sabres and eventually moved on. We'll talk about Chris Stewart a little bit further in the video here as well. William Carrier, prospect, played a little bit with the Sabres. He was left exposed in the expansion draft and has been with Vegas for the last 3 seasons. There was also 2 draft picks. The first draft pick was a 2015 first-round draft pick. The second was a 2016 third-round draft pick. The first-round draft pick was eventually traded to the Winnipeg Jets in the deal that saw Evander Kane and Zach Bogosian go to Winnipeg for Tyler Myers, Drew Stafford, and a couple other pieces. I'm not going to do an Evander Kane part of this trade tree here because most Sabre fans don't want to think about it. I may do this as a separate trade tree at some point. I do know that there is a video, I think Sportsnet did one, on the Evander Kane trade tree a few months ago. So I'm going to hold off on doing that trade tree. That pick became Jack Roslovic. So Winnipeg not only got Tyler Myers, Drew Stafford, first round pick, but that first round pick is a pretty decent piece in the Jets lineup right now. The third round pick was also traded to the Florida Panthers. That was the deal that saw Mark Pysyk being dealt to the Panthers for Dmitry Kulikov. There was a swap of draft picks. The draft pick at this point is not of any consequence. The pick that actually was of consequence in that deal ended up being Rasmus Asplund, who made his debut with the Sabres this past season. So there's a little glimmer of hope there. The jury's still out on him. Let's talk about Yaroslav Halak, though, because this is where we talked about the good part of the Sabres in that first 10 years, where they went to the finals in 99. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals in 06 and 07. This is starting the time where the Sabres haven't made the playoffs in 9 seasons. So a few days after Halak arrived in Buffalo, he was traded to the Washington Capitals with a third-round pick. In return, the Sabres ended up getting Michal Neuvirth, who was a very serviceable goalie. We'll talk about that branch of the tree here in a little bit. In addition, Rusty Kesla. Now, for those of you who forgot that Rusty Kesla was a part of that deal, he had been traded the day before to the Capitals, was included in the deal to Buffalo, and effectively said no bueno and went back to Europe pretty much after that deal. So after he was traded to Buffalo, he actually left North America. So that should tell you what's happened with the Sabres at that point. Let's talk about Michal Neuvirth. Michal Neuvirth played for the Sabres for a couple years, ended up getting traded to the New York Islanders. The Islanders in return sent the Sabres goaltender Chad Johnson, who finished the season 16-17, came back a season later. He had gone as a free agent, I believe it was the Vancouver, then came back in a backup role to Robin Lehner. The other part of that deal was a 2016 third round pick. And this is where, again, you can, if you're a Sabres fan, here comes a little bit of a head slap, because this pick was sent to the Pittsburgh Penguins as compensation to hire Dan Bylsma as the coach. And as Sabre fans know, Dan Bylsma did not last very long in Buffalo, as has most of the coaches in the last 10 years. Again, this is not. I'm again just to paint the picture, going all the way back to the question I asked: how did the Mike Wilson trade help define 20 years of Sabres hockey? You got the good, now we've seen the bad, this is the ugly. However, there is some light at the end of this tunnel, in my opinion. And that's the Chris Stewart part of this trade when he was dealt to the Minnesota Wild. Now, he was dealt, when Chris Stewart was dealt to Minnesota, he was dealt for a 2017 second round pick. That 2017 second round pick ended up being Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who is potentially a franchise goalie for the Sabres. He's been in the ECHL, getting more used to the North American game. He was and coming off of a hip injury. He was very good in juniors. He was lights out at the World Junior Championships a couple years ago when Finland won the gold medal. There's a lot of hope for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. You don't know how it's going to pan out. He's still a young goalie. But the Sabres have, at this point, have not rushed him up, which is a good sign. So, in taking a look at this trade, some of the statistics on the trade itself, there's a whole whack of teams that were involved in this particular trade. Florida, Buffalo, Calgary, Colorado, St. Louis, Washington, Winnipeg, the Islanders, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. The number of players that were traded was 15 total players. The number of picks was 6, but I believe that number needs to be updated because when I did the numbers, I forgot to include the 2016 the deal that sent the third round pick to Florida, the 2016 third round pick. So I apologize for that error. All the images that you've seen here in this trade tree were provided by Sports Card Forum in their Sports Card database. Most of the trade information was found at NHLTradeTracker.com. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this content, please, I ask you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button for this video. By all means, please leave a comment. What was good, what was bad. Let me know your thoughts about this trade tree. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.